The emergency beacon cut through space like a scream. Commander Elena Vasquez stared at the holographic display floating above her desk, watching the red signal pulse from Outpost Meridian. 3 days. 3 days since the last transmission from the mining station on the edge of human space. Any word from the rescue ships? She asked her aide, without looking away from the display. The Confederation AV says they're stretched too thin. Pirates hitting supply routes in the Vega sector. They can send a ship in 6 weeks, maybe 8. Lieutenant Chen's voice carried the weight of bad news delivered too many times. Elena's jaw tightened. 6 weeks meant everyone at Meridian was dead. The outpost housed 200 miners and their families. Children played in those corridors. Her sister Maria worked in the hydroponics bay. The door to her office hissed open. "Ma'am, there's someone here about the Meridian contract." Elena turned. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and lean, wearing a coat that seemed to shift color in the light. Silver hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and eyes the color of winter storms met hers without flinching. "I'm Kira Thorne," the stranger said, voice soft but carrying an edge like good steel. "I hear you need someone to check on your people." The posting was for information gathering only, Elena said carefully. "We don't even know what happened out there. Could be pirates, could be system failure, could be worse." Kira stepped into the room, and Elena noticed the way she moved. Fluid, controlled, like a predator conserving energy. "What's the last thing you heard from them?" Elena touched a control, and the room filled with static. Then, through the interference, came a voice tight with terror. "Something in the mines. They're not animals. They're smart. They're hunting us. The barriers won't hold much longer. If anyone receives this, don't send ships. Don't send soldiers. Send." The transmission cut to white noise. "Send what?" Kira asked. "We don't know." That was Chief Morrison, head of security. Good man. Former military. Elena studied the bounty hunter's face. "What makes you think you can handle something that scared him?" Kira's smile was winter cold. "Because I specialize in things that aren't supposed to exist." Elena had heard whispers about hunters like this. The ones who took contracts others wouldn't touch. The ones who came back from places where whole squadrons vanished. But whispers were just stories until you needed them to be true. The Confederation offers standard rates for reconnaissance. I don't work for the Confederation. Kira pulled out a small device, placing it on Elena's desk. "This is my rate. Non négociable." The number made Elena's breath catch. That's enough to buy a small ship. Good ships are expensive. Good crews cost more. And good equipment costs everything. Kira's expression didn't change. "How much are 200 lives worth to you, Commander?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena thought of Maria's last message, excited about the new seeds arriving for the garden. About the families who'd carved out a life in the darkness between stars. About children who might never see another sunrise. "When can you leave?" "I'm already gone." Kira pocketed the device. "My ship's at Docking Bay 7. I'll need all the technical data you have on Meridian. Station layouts, security protocols, everything. What about backup? Shouldn't we send no?" The word cut through the air like a blade. "If there are survivors, a large force will only get them killed. If there aren't, then numbers won't matter anyway." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What do you think is out there?" Kira paused at the door, silver hair catching the light. "Something that thinks it's the apex predator." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "It's about to learn otherwise." The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving Elena alone with the pulsing beacon and the weight of her decision. She'd just hired a ghost to hunt monsters. The question was whether she'd sent salvation or simply fed the darkness one more victim. Outside her window, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in their light. But somewhere among them, engines were already warming up, and death was choosing its tools for the hunt ahead. The Wraith was not like other ships, where most vessels announced themselves with running lights and communication arrays. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The hull was a dark metal that shifted between black and silver depending on the angle of view. No corporate markings, no registration numbers visible to casual inspection. It looked like what it was, a weapon designed for one purpose. Kira moved through the cramped corridors with practiced ease, checking systems that hummed with barely contained power. The ship's AI spoke in a voice like whispered secrets, all systems nominal. Meridian coordinates locked. Estimated travel time, 47 hours at maximum burn. Run silent protocols once we clear the system, she ordered, settling into the pilot's seat. The chair molded itself to her body, neural interfaces coming online with a soft chime. For a moment, the boundary between woman and machine blurred. The Wraith lifted from the docking bay without fanfare. Just another ship among thousands leaving the orbital station. But once they reached open space, it showed its true nature. The engines sang a low note that spoke of forces barely held in check, and space folded around them like origami. As the stars shifted to lines of light, Kira allowed herself to think about what waited at journey's end. The fear in Morrison's voice had been real. Whatever was at Meridian had broken a good soldier's nerve. That narrowed the possibilities considerably. She'd hunted rogue experiments from corporate black sites. She'd tracked down pirates who thought themselves untouchable. She'd even faced things that officially didn't exist, creatures pulled from nightmares by scientists who'd forgotten the difference between could and should. But this felt different. The silence from Meridian was too complete, too sudden. Whatever had taken the Outpost had done it quickly and thoroughly. That spoke of intelligence, planning, and resources. The ship's library contained everything known about Outpost Meridian. Elena had been thorough. Mining operation, rare earth extraction, strategic position near the Kepler Nebula. Standard defensive grid, enough to handle pirates or raiders. 200 souls living and working in a metal can suspended in the void. What could have taken them all? The answer lay 47 hours ahead, in the darkness between stars where human lights had gone out one by one. But as the Wraith cut through space like a silver knife, Kira felt the familiar cold certainty settle in her bones. Whatever was waiting at Meridian had made a mistake. It had left a trail, and she was very, very good at following trails to their source. Outpost Meridian hung in space like a dying ember. What should have been a constellation of running lights was now a dark mass against the stars, only the faint glow of emergency power indicating anything lived within its hull. The Wraith approached slowly, sensors sweeping the station and surrounding space for any sign of threat. No active weapons signatures, the AI reported. No ships detected within scanning range. Station appears intact, but operating on minimal power. Kira studied the readouts with growing unease. The docking bay showed sealed, but that could mean anything. She'd seen stations that looked perfectly normal from outside, while horrors waited within. The key was in the details. Life signs. A pause that lasted too long. Inconclusive. Something is interfering with deep scans. Electromagnetic distortion of unknown origin. That was interesting. Kira pulled up the station's technical specifications. Nothing in Meridian's design should create that kind of interference, which meant something else was causing it. She guided the Wraith to an airlock on the station's outer ring, well away from the main docking bays. If something was waiting inside, she didn't want to announce her arrival through the front door. The ship's systems interfaced with the airlock protocols, and after a moment of digital negotiation, the outer doors cycled open. Kira suited up methodically, checking each system twice. The armor was custom work, military-grade with modifications that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Active camouflage, enhanced strength systems, and weapons that most people would consider illegal. In her line of work, illegal was often the difference between coming home and becoming another cautionary tale. The station's atmosphere read normal, but she kept her helmet sealed anyway. Air could lie. The corridor beyond the airlock was dark except for the red glow of emergency lighting, casting everything in shades of blood and shadow. Her first step into Meridian told her everything she needed to know about what had happened here. The walls were scored with deep gouges, metal torn like paper by something with claws the size of daggers. But more telling was what she didn't see. No blast marks from energy weapons, no scorch patterns from explosions. Whatever had done this hadn't needed to break down doors or blast through barriers. It had simply torn its way through. Kira activated her helmet's recording system and began moving deeper into the station. The emergency lighting created a maze of shadows that seemed to move just beyond her vision. Her suit proximity sensors showed clear corridors ahead, but every instinct screamed that she was being watched. The first body was in the central hub, near what had been the communications array. Or rather, what remained of a body. Morrison, according to the ID tags scattered among the carnage. The former soldier had made a stand here, judging by the barricades and empty ammunition containers. He'd died hard, taking something with him if the dark stains were any indication. But he'd still died. Kira knelt beside the remains, analyzing the wounds with clinical precision. Claw marks? Definitely, but too precise to be from any natural predator. The cuts were surgical, almost artistic in their brutality. Whatever had killed Morrison had taken its time. A sound echoed from deeper in the station. Not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something that made her spine crawl with recognition of a predator's call. It came from the mining levels far below. She activated her comm system and tried to raise the wraith. Static answered her. The electromagnetic interference was stronger here, probably coming from whatever was making that sound. That meant she was on her own until she could eliminate the source. Moving through Meridian was like walking through a graveyard. Bodies lay where they'd fallen, but many were incomplete. Drag marks led away from the rest, vanishing into air vents and maintenance shafts too small for humans. Something had been collecting the dead. The mining levels were worse. The industrial corridors were a maze of torn metal and scattered equipment. Emergency doors hung open like broken teeth, their security systems ripped out with casual violence. But it was the walls that made Kira stop and stare. They were covered in symbols. Not carved, but burned into the metal with precision that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Below them, written in what she hoped was not human blood, were words in a script she didn't recognize. But her suit's translation system did. We claim this nest for the collective. Let the small flesh things flee or feed our young. Collective. That was a name from classified files, whispered rumors from the outer colonies. Ships that vanished without trace. Worlds found empty, their populations simply gone. The few survivors spoke of things that hunted in packs, creatures that thought of humans as nothing more than breeding stock for their offspring. The sound came again, closer now. Multiple voices joining in harmony that spoke of organized intelligence. Kira checked her weapons one final time and continued deeper into the station. The mining bay was a cathedral of industrial machinery, excavators, and processors arranged around a central pit that descended into the asteroid's heart. But the equipment stood silent and broken, and the pit glowed with a sickly green light that had never come from human technology. At the edge of the pit, something moved. Kira had seen the classification files, but seeing a collective warrior in person was different. 8 feet tall, covered in chitinous armor that gleamed like oil in the dim light. For arms ending in claws that could shred steel, and a head crowned with sensory spines that tracked her movement with predatory precision. But it wasn't alone. More shapes moved in the shadows around the pit, and the green glow revealed others descending the walls like massive spiders. A hunting pack, perfectly coordinated and utterly silent. They thought they had cornered prey. They were about to learn why humans had earned their reputation among the stars. Kira smiled behind her helmet's visor and began to choose her targets. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, and she brought exactly the right tools for the job. The first warrior never knew what killed it. Kira's rifle spoke once, a whisper of displaced air, and the creature's head simply vanished in a spray of ichor. She was already moving as the others reacted, active camouflage bending light around her as she became one with the shadows. The second warrior died, reaching for weapons it would never use. The third managed a shriek of warning before Kira's blade found a gap in its armor, sliding between chitin plates with surgical precision. Then the real fight began. The pack moved like a single organism, flowing around the mining equipment with inhuman grace. But Kira had fought impossible odds before, and she'd learned that even the most perfect predators had weaknesses. The question was whether she could find them before the collective found hers. The collective warriors moved like liquid death through the mining bay. Their coordination was perfect, each creature knowing exactly where its packmates would be without needing to look. They flowed around obstacles with impossible grace, for arms working in harmony as they closed the distance between hunter and prey. But Kira Thorne had not survived this long by fighting fair. Her active camouflage bent light around her as she rolled behind a massive or processor, the creature that had been reaching for her clawing empty air. The suit's enhancement systems flooded her muscles with synthetic adrenaline, turning human reflexes into something that could match alien speed. She came up firing, the rifle in her hands, speaking death in controlled bursts. Each shot was placed with surgical precision, finding the gaps where chitin plates met soft tissue. Ichor sprayed across the mining equipment as two more warriors dropped, their alien shrieks echoing off the metal walls. But there were so many of them. A claw raked across her shoulder, scraping against armor that should have been impenetrable. The impact spun her around, and she found herself face to face with the pack leader. It was larger than the others, its armor bearing scars from 100 battles, and its eyes held an intelligence that was coldly calculating. It spoke, the words coming out in perfectly accented standard. "You fight well, small flesh. Your death will bring honor to our broodmother." Kira's response was to put 3 rounds center mass. The shot struck home, but the creature barely staggered. Its armor was thicker than the others, reinforced with what looked like metal plates grafted directly into the chitin. "Is that supposed to impress me?" she asked, ejecting the spent magazine and slamming home a fresh one. "I've killed bigger things before breakfast." The pack leader's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "You killed the weak ones, the scouts, the expendable. Now you face a Voidborn of the Inner Circle." That explained a few things. Voidborn were the collective's elite warriors, creatures bred specifically for combat against advanced species. Their armor was grown rather than made, incorporating technology stolen from dozens of conquered worlds. No wonder her standard ammunition wasn't having much effect. But Kira had come prepared for more than just standard targets. She smiled and pulled out a different weapon. The pistol looked almost primitive compared to her rifle, but appearances could be deceiving. The rounds it fired weren't kinetic projectiles, but contained microsingularities, each bullet carrying enough gravitational force to tear apart molecular bonds. The Voidborn saw the weapon change, and actually took a step back. "Impossible. Humans do not possess such technology." "Humans don't," Kira agreed, raising the pistol. "But I'm not just human anymore." She fired once. The round struck the creature's center mass, and simply erased everything within a 6-inch radius, leaving a perfectly spherical hole through its torso. The Voidborn looked down at the wound with what might have been surprise, then toppled backwards into the mining pit. The remaining warriors paused, their perfect coordination faltering for the first time. Kira could see them reassessing, their predator instincts recognizing that the equation had changed. She was no longer prey. She was competition. The pack scattered, seeking cover among the mining equipment. But Kira's suit was already tracking their movement, mapping heat signatures and electromagnetic pulses through the industrial maze. They thought they were hiding. They were simply giving her better firing angles. She moved through the mining bay like a ghost, the enhanced reflexes and active camouflage making her effectively invisible. Each warrior died alone, separated from the pack, and cut down before they could call for help. The microsingularity rounds made short work of their armor, and her monomolecular blade found the joints where even collective engineering couldn't protect them. But as the last warrior fell, Kira heard something that made her blood run cold. More sounds from deeper in the station. Not the hunting calls of warriors, but something else. Something that spoke of vast numbers and inhuman purpose. She made her way to the pit's edge and looked down into the green glow. What she saw there explained everything about what had happened to Outpost Meridian's population. The pit descended far deeper than any mining operation required, its walls lined with organic structures that pulsed with their own sick light. Egg chambers, each one the size of a small room, filled with shapes that twisted and moved in the artificial wombs. And, tending them, moving between the chambers with careful precision, were smaller creatures. Workers. Drones. The collective hadn't come to Meridian to hunt. They'd come to breed. The missing colonists hadn't been killed. They'd been processed, converted into the raw materials needed to spawn a new generation of warriors. The thought made her stomach clench with rage and disgust. But worse was what she saw at the bottom of the pit. A structure that was part technology, part biology, and entirely alien. It pulsed with the same green light as the egg chambers, and from it came a sound like singing. Beautiful and terrible, it spoke of intelligence vast and utterly inhuman. A collective overmind. The central processing unit for an entire invasion fleet. Kira pulled back from the edge, her mind racing. This changed everything. Meridian wasn't just an isolated attack. It was a staging ground, a factory for producing the forces needed to overwhelm human space. And, judging by the number of egg chambers, they were very close to being ready. She activated her comm system, trying to punch a signal through the interference. Static answered her, but underneath it, she thought she heard something. A faint voice, distorted but human. Anyone out there, trapped in Section 7, they don't know we're survivors. They were actually survivors. Kira checked her ammunition and weapon charge levels. The micro-singularity pistol had 3 rounds left. Her rifle was down to 2 magazines. The monomolecular blade was running low on power. Not much for what she was planning. But then, she'd faced worse odds with less equipment. The question was whether she could reach the survivors, eliminate the overmind, and get them all out before the rest of the collective fleet arrived. Because something this elaborate wasn't the work of a single ship. Somewhere out there, more vessels were coming. She just had to make sure they found nothing but wreckage when they got here. Kira checked her suit's power levels one more time, made sure her weapons were secure, and began planning her route to Section 7. Time was running out, and 200 lives had become something far more important. The future of human expansion into this sector might depend on what happened in the next few hours. No pressure at all. She smiled grimly and began to move. After all, impossible odds were what they paid her for. The corridor leading to Section 7 was a nightmare of organic growth and twisted metal. The collective workers had been busy converting human architecture into something that better suited their purposes. Walls pulsed with veins of living tissue, and the air recycling systems had been replaced with breathing apparatus that wheezed and gurgled with each cycle. Kira moved through it all with practiced stealth, her suit's sensors mapping the changes and looking for patterns. The workers seemed to follow regular routes, tending to different sections according to some schedule only they understood. That gave her windows of opportunity, but they were small and getting smaller as more of the station was converted. She found the survivors in what had been the residential section. A reinforced shelter that had been designed to protect colonists from mining accidents had become their refuge. 23 people, mostly families with children, hiding in a space meant for half that number. The door was locked from the inside, but her suit's override codes got her through the security systems. 23 pairs of eyes looked up at her with hope and terror in equal measure. "Who?" one of the men began. "I'm your way out," Kira said simply. "But we need to move fast. How long have you been here?" "For days," a woman answered. She was holding a child who couldn't have been more than 6, both of them too thin and too scared. "We heard the fighting, then everything went quiet. We've been afraid to leave." Smart. The collective workers would have found them eventually, but hiding had bought them time. "The things," the man said. "What are they?" "Bad news with claws," Kira answered. "But that's my problem. Your problem is staying alive long enough for me to deal with them." She pulled up the station schematics on her suit's display, plotting routes to the docking bay where the Wraith waited. The direct path was crawling with collective bioforms, but there were maintenance tunnels that might work. "Can you make it through ventilation shafts?" she asked. Some nodding, some uncertain looks. The children would slow them down, and injured people might not make it at all. "There's another way," she said, making a decision that might get them all killed. "But you'll have to trust me completely. No questions, no hesitation, no looking back." "Can you do that?" The woman with the child looked at her for a long moment. "You came back for us. That's all I need to know." Kira nodded and began explaining the plan. It was insane, dangerous, and had about a dozen ways to fail catastrophically. But it was also the only chance they had. The plan was madness, but sometimes madness was the only option that made sense. Kira led the survivors through the converted sections of Meridian, moving in small groups through corridors that pulsed with alien life. The collective workers ignored them, their attention focused on the endless task of converting human technology into something more suitable for their purposes. That was the key to the plan. The workers weren't fighters. They were specialized bioforms, bred for construction and maintenance, not combat. As long as the survivors moved quietly and didn't trigger any alarm responses. They were effectively invisible. But getting to the Wraith was only the first part of the problem. The real challenge was what came after. Kira had studied the overmine structure at the bottom of the mining pit, analyzing its construction and purpose. It wasn't just a command center. It was a communication relay, keeping contact with the rest of the collective fleet. Destroying it would cut off the invasion force from their support network, but it would also send a very clear signal that the human called for backup, which meant they had maybe an hour before every collective ship in the sector came calling. Almost there, she whispered into her comm, watching the last group of survivors disappear into the Wraith's cargo hold. The ship's medical systems were already at work, treating injuries and malnutrition while the AI prepared departure protocols. "Hunter," came a voice from the ship's speakers. "Dr. Sarah Chun, the senior medic among the survivors. These people need immediate medical attention. Some of them won't survive a high-G burn to escape." Kira felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How long do they need?" "Minimum 12 hours for stabilization. Preferably 24. 24 hours. The collective fleet would be here in one. Get them ready for whatever you can manage," Kira said finally. "I'm going to buy us some time." She sealed her helmet and began to walk back toward the mining section. Behind her, the Wraith began its preparations for emergency departure. The survivors were safe for now. Whether they stayed that way depended on what happened in the next hour. The mining pit was exactly as she'd left it, green light pulsing from the depths as the organic machinery continued its work. But now she could see the full scope of what the collective had built here. Egg chambers lined the walls like honeycomb, each one containing something that would soon be ready to hatch. And at the bottom, the overmind pulsed with its own rhythm, coordinating the work with inhuman efficiency. Destroying it wouldn't be enough. The egg chambers had to go too, along with everything else the collective had built, which meant she needed something with a lot more punch than her remaining weapons. Fortunately, she was standing in a mining facility. Kira made her way to the explosive storage area, where the colonists had kept the charges used to break up asteroid rock. Military-grade plasma explosives, enough to crack a mountain if properly placed. More than enough to collapse the mining section and everything in it. But first, she had to deal with the Guardians. The Voidborn warriors she'd killed earlier had been replaced. Bigger ones this time, their armor bearing the marks of genetic modification that spoke of specialized breeding. They moved differently, too, with the careful precision of creatures that knew they were protecting something vital. Kira counted at least 6 of them, plus an unknown number of workers and support bioforms, all of them standing between her and the overmind. She smiled and began placing charges. The first explosion took out the power grid for the mining section, plunging everything into darkness except for the green glow from the pit. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red, and suddenly the air was filled with the sound of alien battle cries. They knew she was here now. The pretense was over. Kira moved through the industrial maze like a ghost, using the confusion and darkness to her advantage. Her suit's night vision turned the mining bay into a tactical display, highlighting targets and tracking movement with military precision. The second charge took out a support strut, sending a shower of debris into the pit. Collective workers scattered like insects, their coordination broken by the unexpected attack. The third charge was personal. She placed it directly on the overmind's housing, watching the alien intelligence pulse with what might have been fear or fury. The biomechanical construct tried to withdraw deeper into the pit, but there was nowhere to go. "This is for Meridian," she said quietly, and triggered the detonator. The explosion was magnificent. Green fire erupted from the pit as the overmind died, its death scream echoing through the station's corridors. The egg chambers began to collapse one by one, their organic structure failing without the central intelligence to maintain them. But the Voidborn warriors were still coming, and now they were angry. Kira ran for the exit as the mining section began to collapse around her, debris falling like rain from the damaged ceiling. Behind her, she could hear the sound of pursuit, claws scraping against metal as the surviving collective forces gave chase. She made it to the main corridor as the fourth charge detonated, sealing the mining section permanently. But the sound that came through the collapsing metal told her everything she needed to know about what was coming next. Ships. Lots of them. The collective fleet had arrived early. Kira ran for the docking bay, her comm system finally clear enough to raise the Wraith. Emergency departure now. Medical systems aren't finished. They'll have to be good enough. We got company coming. She reached the airlock as the first collective ships appeared on the station's perimeter, their biomechanical hulls bristling with weapons that could turn Meridian into scrap metal in seconds. The Wraith was already warming up its engines, ready to run. But, as Kira sealed the airlock behind her, she realized they had a problem. The collective ships were blocking the direct escape route, and their weapons were already charging for a killing shot. "How many ships?" she asked the AI as she strapped herself into the pilot seat. 17 combat vessels detected. Multiple biocruiser classifications. They appeared to be surrounding the station. 17 ships. Against one stealth vessel with damaged survivors aboard and limited ammunition. Kira looked at the tactical display and began calculating firing solutions. The Wraith was fast and well-armed, but it wasn't a miracle worker. They need every advantage they could get. "Dr. Chun," she called over the internal comm. "How are those patients?" "Stable for now. But if we pull high GS, we're going to pull a lot more than high GS, Kira said grimly. "Strap everyone down and pray to whatever gods you believe in." She looked at the collective fleet one more time, noting their formation and weapons placement. Professional, coordinated, confident. They thought they had her trapped. Time to show them why that was a mistake. The Wraith's engines came online with a sound like controlled thunder, and space began to fold around them as reality prepared to learn new rules of physics. Kira Thorne had come to Meridian to save lives. Now, she had to keep them saved against odds that would have made a sane person surrender. Good thing sanity had never been one of her strong points. The hunt was about to begin its final phase, and this time she was bringing everyone home. The Wraith burst from Meridian's docking bay like a silver bullet fired from a cosmic gun. Behind it, the abandoned outpost began to break apart as Kira's charges continued their work, sections collapsing into each other in a chain reaction of destruction. But the collective fleet was ready for them. 17 bioships moved with predatory grace, their living hulls rippling with weapon ports that tracked the Wraith's escape vector. They positioned themselves in a perfect sphere around the station, cutting off every possible escape route. "They're hailing us," the ship's AI reported. "Put it through." The main display flickered to show an alien face that was beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers were beautiful. Elegant features framed eyes that held no warmth, no mercy, only cold calculation. "I am War Prime Zealoth of the Collective Third Fleet," the alien said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of vocal cords never meant for human speech. "You will surrender the stolen bioforms immediately." Kira almost laughed. "Stolen bioforms? You mean the humans you were planning to turn into baby food?" The small flesh things were rightfully harvested. Their genetic material was required for the birthing cycles. Zealoth's head tilted in what might have been curiosity. "You interest us, Hunter. Your modifications are extensive. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement." "Counter-offer," Kira said, her hands moving over the Wraith's control systems. "Go home. Forget this sector exists. Live long enough to regret crossing paths with humanity." War Prime Zealoth's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Amusement, maybe, or hunger. "You pilot a single vessel against an entire war fleet. Your courage is admirable, but futile. Stand down now, and your death will be swift." "You know what?" Kira said, checking the status of her weapons systems one final time. "I've had about enough of aliens telling humans what they can and can't do." She cut the communication and activated the Wraith's combat protocols. Throughout the ship, systems that had been running silent suddenly came online. Weapons that existed only in theoretical journals emerged from hidden compartments. Shields that bent reality itself sprang to life around the hull. The collective fleet had been expecting a desperate escape attempt from an outgunned civilian vessel. What they got was something else entirely. The Wraith didn't try to run. Instead, it turned toward the largest bio ship and accelerated directly at it, engines screaming as space warped around the hull. The collective vessels fired in perfect coordination, enough firepower to vaporize a battlecruiser. The shots passed through empty space where the Wraith had been a split second before. Kira had learned a few things during her years as a hunter. One was that no matter how perfect your enemies thought they were they always had blind spots. Another was that sometimes the best way out of a trap was straight through the middle. The Wraith materialized inside the collective formation, its quantum displacement drive allowing it to step between dimensions for microseconds at a time. Before the aliens could adjust their targeting, Kira's ship opened fire. But these weren't conventional weapons. The Wraith carried devices that most civilizations would have banned as too dangerous to use. Molecular disruptors that unraveled chemical bonds. Gravitational shapers that could turn a ship's own mass against it. And, stranger things, weapons pulled from the dark corners of human ingenuity. The first bio ship simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of component atoms. The second ship tried to ram the Wraith, its living hull extending boarding tendrils to grapple with the smaller vessel. Kira triggered the molecular disruptors, and the alien ship's biomechanical structure began to eat itself from within. But 17 ships were too many, even for the Wraith. Energy beams seared across her hull, overloading shields and scorching armor. Something vital exploded in the engine compartment, and suddenly they were running on backup power. Hull breach on Deck 3. The AI reported with mechanical comm. Life support compromised. Estimated time to total system failure, 14 minutes. In a medical bay, Dr. Chun was fighting her own battle against time and physics. The survivors were strapped into acceleration couches, but the violent maneuvers were taking their toll. Several were unconscious, and more were sliding into shock. "I'm losing them," she called over the comm. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." Kira looked at the tactical display, calculating odds and possibilities. The collective ships were closing in, their formation tightening like a noose. In a few minutes, they'd be close enough for boarding actions, and then it would all be over. Unless, AI, how much power do we have left in the quantum displacement system? Insufficient for sustained combat maneuvering. Perhaps 1 or 2 short-range jumps. 1 or 2 jumps. Not enough to escape, but maybe enough for something else. Kira began inputting coordinates, her fingers flying over the control systems as she calculated vectors and energy requirements. It was insane. It was impossible. It would probably kill them all. But it was also their only chance. Dr. Chun, secure for emergency maneuvers. This is going to be rough. Rougher than what we've already been through. Much. The Wraith suddenly stopped moving, hanging motionless in space as the collective ships converged. For a moment, it looked like surrender. Then Kira triggered the displacement drive one final time. The ship didn't move through space. Instead, it moved through time. For exactly 1.3 seconds, the Wraith existed in the past, occupying the same coordinates it had been in when the battle began. The quantum mechanics involved would have given most physicists nightmares, but Kira had stopped worrying about the theoretical implications long ago. When the ship rematerialized, it was inside the collective formation again. But this time, the alien vessels were exactly where she calculated they would be, their positions predictable based on their previous movements. The Wraith's remaining weapons spoke in unison, every charge and every exotic particle beam firing at once. At point-blank range, even biomechanical armor couldn't withstand that kind of focused destruction. 7 ships died in the first volley. The others scattered, their perfect formation broken by the unexpected attack. But their return fire was devastating, tearing through the Wraith's weakened shields and sending cascades of sparks through the control systems. "That's it," Kira announced, watching her weapon systems go offline one by one. "We're out of tricks." But sometimes you didn't need tricks. Sometimes you just needed to be human. The remaining collective ships moved in for the kill, confident that their prey was finally helpless. They closed to boarding range, extending capture tentacles to secure the valuable prize. That was when the cavalry arrived. Space erupted with new contacts as the Confederation Navy's first battle group dropped out of hyperspace. 12 ships of a line, their hulls bristling with weapons that spoke of humanity's long experience with hostile aliens. "This is Admiral Santos aboard the CNV Retribution," came a voice over the emergency frequencies. "All collective vessels in this system, you are ordered to surrender immediately or be destroyed." War Prime Zilitha's response was to order her remaining ships to attack both the Wraith and the new arrivals. It was a mistake. The Confederation Navy had been fighting aliens for 3 centuries. They learned a few things about collective tactics, and they'd come prepared. The battle was brief and decisive. Bioships that had seemed invincible were reduced to drifting hulks by weapons designed specifically to counter their advantages. Within minutes, the collective fleet was either destroyed or fleeing into hyperspace. The Wraith was taken in tow by the Retribution, its damaged hull secured in the flagship's massive docking bay. The survivors were transferred to the Navy's medical facilities, where they received care that Dr. Chen's makeshift setup couldn't provide. Later, as Kira sat in the Admiral's quarters nursing a drink that burned like liquid fire, Santos asked the question she'd been expecting. "How did you know we were coming?" Kira smiled and pulled out a small device. "Emergency beacon. Military grade, quantum encrypted. I triggered it before I went into Meridian. But the transmission delay from this sector, 47 hours. Same amount of time it took me to reach Meridian from the orbital station." She took another sip of the burning liquid. "I sent the signal the moment I accepted the contract." Santos stared at her. "You planned this entire operation assuming we'd arrive at exactly the right moment." "I planned for every possibility I could think of," Kira corrected, "including the one where I had to fight a collective war fleet with a single ship." The Admiral shook his head slowly. "The survivors are calling you a hero. Said you came back for them when no one else would." "I did the job I was paid for, and destroyed an entire collective breeding facility in the process. Our xenobiology teams are going over the wreckage. They're calling it the find of the century." Kira finished her drink and stood. "Send the bill to Commander Vasquez. I'm sure the Confederation can afford it." She was halfway to the door when Santos called after her. "There are more facilities out there. More breeding programs, more invasion fleets. We could use someone with your skills." Kira paused at the threshold, silver hair catching the light. "I don't work for governments, Admiral. Too many rules, not enough creative freedom." "Then, what do you work for?" She turned back, and her smile was sharp as winter starlight. "The highest bidder, and the certainty that somewhere out there, something thinks it's the apex predator." The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving Santos alone with his reports and the growing realization that humanity's expansion into the galaxy had just acquired a very dangerous guardian angel. In the medical bay, the survivors from Meridian were recovering under the care of Navy doctors. They would live. They would remember. And they would spread the word that when darkness fell on human worlds, sometimes salvation came in silver ships with weapons that could rewrite physics. The collective would remember too. Their perfect formation had been shattered by a single human who refused to accept that any fight was hopeless. In the vast darkness between stars, other threats were stirring. Other predators who thought humanity was just another species to be harvested or enslaved. They were all about to learn the same lesson the collective had learned above Meridian. Humans didn't just survive. They specialized in making their enemies regret the encounter. And some humans specialized in making sure those regrets were very, very brief.